Hello, I'm Roger Bisby and welcome to another one of my London walks, and today we're going to walk around the London Wall, the ancient Roman London Wall, and this is an original part of it. Unfortunately there's not a lot left of it, but at one time the Romans, or to be more accurate their slaves, because they didn't actually do a lot of work, they just poked people with sharp swords until they did what they wanted. So what they did is they built this wall all the way around London from the river, and it goes to about 3 kilometres around what we call the City of London, and it goes back down to the river. So we're going to walk around the whole lot. I've got Magnus, my grandson, cameraman extraordinaire, with me today, and he's up for it. He's had his shreddies, so we're going to walk the whole wall, see what we can see. Now this is probably the best example of it. In some places it's 10 feet high, some places it's 6 feet thick. Very strong wall. And what you will find is the original Roman bits have got these tiles going through. This is how the Romans made bricks, very thin, because they were fired by wood, not by coal, so they had to keep them thin to get the firing right. But you can see they've got these bricks going through. Now you might wonder why these bricks are here. The reason these bricks are here is they're acting like wall ties. Some of the stone is ragged and it would act like a pile of marbles in some ways. So every so often they put a row or two, a course or two of tiles in there, bedded those down on the lime and the concrete. You can see all the little bits of stone in there, and that just tied the wall together. So as it goes up, you can see another row of tiles up there and then another one, and that's why it was able to survive. Now it's very low down in the ground, but at one time this is where the ground was, and it's only over hundreds and hundreds of years, in fact a couple of thousand years nearly now, since this wall was built. And the ground level in London has just increased because people they dump their rubbish there, they dump their old building materials there, and the thing just built up. So this is a representation of where it is. Some of the other bits we're going to see are buried way down in the ground now, but of course they weren't at one time. Now you might wonder why they had a wall. They didn't build it straight away when they came here. It took them roughly 150 years to get around to building a wall. Some people say they don't know why it was built, but it wasn't built for protection, because actually they were over there and they had a fort over there where they went at night. And it wasn't so much that they were being attacked, but that people were coming into the city in the middle of the night and stealing stuff and taking it away. So putting a wall around the city and gates in the wall that they could close at night meant that everybody that was in the city stayed in the city, everybody was outside stayed outside, and there weren't people having things away all day long, or all night long I should say. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason that they built it is because of taxes, because if they built a wall and they had gates, everybody who came in trying to sell goods in the city would have to pay a tax, would have to pay a tariff. So that way they had control over the city. Now the wall lasted a very long time, until the Romans eventually gave up on this country and left to go and defend their own country. And the wall fell into disrepair. Nobody was really that interested in keeping it, and for a long time people were just taking bits of it. You know, the stone is good, they were using that to build houses and all sorts of other places, and so bit by bit they just recycled it, if you like. But this stone, London doesn't actually have any stone of its own. If you dig down here, all you get is clay. So this stone came from Kent. It's called Kentish ragstone, and they brought that up the Medway in barges along the River Thames and unloaded it here. And you can imagine what a laborious process that was, because there weren't any trucks. It was horse and cart, or it was men dragging stones. So a hugely impressive effort to build this. You can see the lime as well. The lime had to be dug out on the chalk, and the lime had to go into kilns to make it. Very, very good. If you look at this, if you think that this is nearly 1,800 years old, stood up pretty well, hasn't it? I'm not sure how many of our modern buildings are going to be standing in 1,800 years, but I'll come back and let you know. So just while we're passing, I just want to point this out. Most people have walked past it. It's the London Hydraulic Power Company, and basically they use the power of water, hydraulics, to lift Tower Bridge and all sorts of other things. Lifts all over the place were powered by hydraulic power from water. And this is just one of the lovely towers that's left. They're dotted around. You've got to look for them, but they are there. Now this sundial, which is fairly recent, hasn't got anything to do with the wall as such, but it's just opposite the wall, so it's worth a look. And what it does is, not only does it work as a sundial, tell you the time if you want to know, but also there's the history of London around the edge of it, so you can follow it, so you can get a very quick idea of the progression from Roman times right round to modern times. All as we walk along from the beginning, and you can see that this really isn't part of the original wall. This is what they built up afterwards. As the wall fell into disrepair, the Romans left and it was neglected for quite a while, and then they decided, when the Vikings came along, they decided that they needed to rebuild it, and people moved back into the City of London. So what we see here is probably all the rebuild, but down there, if you look just down there, you will see that that's where those rows, those courses of tile creasing go through. The red tile, which indicates that that's the original Roman structure. So you can more or less say that the Roman structure was up to there and that this bit was added afterwards.
Now here we are in the London Wall Museum in Vine Street. This is fairly new, this museum. There's not a huge amount to see, but it is interesting. And the thing that you can see is that these facing stones here are the dressed stones. They're the real McCoy. What we're looking at in some of the other bits of the wall is basically just the infill, the rubble, the bits of ragstone that were just put in the middle.
And there you can see the tile creasing going through, tying the wall together. So perfect example of a Roman wall, Roman section. There must be more buried that they don't know about yet. It's great, isn't it? I mean, that's a new bit. Somebody's built on top of the old foundations, the old wall. It's happened all the time. So here we have some of the bits of pottery, old brick, things found at the base of the wall when they were digging. Bit of copper. Bones as well. Lots and lots of bones, lots and lots of... You can almost imagine they just slung the bones in the bottom of the wall. They definitely slung the dogs down there, the dead dogs, in Houndsditch, which was part of the ditch, part of the increased protection, that they dug this ditch all the way around the wall and chucked all kinds of things in it. So they must have, when they got a dead dog, they must have just chucked it over the wall into Houndsditch. Why they went to a particular place to put the dead dogs, why they couldn't just put them anywhere, I don't know. But there you go. Got to get rid of your dogs somewhere, I suppose. Sorry, dog lovers, I know you don't like to think of that. Your dog dying. Insensitive of me. I'm pretty sure this guy's not original. So here you are. If you look out for street signs, they give you a bit of a clue. We're just crossing the wall here, obviously. We're in the City of London. So when you have a wall that's 10 foot high and 6 feet thick, you need a few gates in it. You need a way for people to come and go. And this, working our way up from Tower Hill, is the first of the gates. It's called Aldgate. Now the meaning of that word has kind of disappeared in time. Some people say that it was a kind of corruption, it meant old gate. You can understand that. People saying, oh, I'm going up to Aldgate. Aldgate, Aldgate, you know. And the other people say that actually there was an ale house. There was actually a pub in the gate. And so what it was Alegate. But you take your choice, and whatever you say, nobody's going to be able to contradict you, because nobody knows. Aldgate, Aldgate, Alegate, who cares? It's no longer here. They got rid of it. But at one time, it was the gate that led you up the road to Colchester, which was the first of the Roman cities, and in some ways the most important one at one point. So you could say that you came through the Aldgate, out into the wilds of Essex, you crossed the River Lee at Oldford it's still called, and After that, you could say that the only way was Essex. So, Aldgate, not only was there a wall here, which was about 3 metres high, there was also a ditch, and that ditch followed the line of the wall as an added defence. But over the years, the ditch got filled in with rubble and rubbish and, you know, fly tipping basically, and obviously is no longer here, and neither was the wall. So here we are, even though the wall has gone, set in stone is a little trail that we can follow towards our next gate, which is Bishopsgate. We seem to have lost the wall. Where's it gone? Oh, well, let's travel, hopefully. Hopefully we'll pick it up again at Bishopsgate.
All right. Great, John. That's some great advice to me over the years. So
nice to see you. Thanks for stopping. Cheers. Bye. This is the church of St. Botolph's without. Now, there's also St. Botolph's within. So within, without, what does that mean? Well, this was outside the wall. And, you know, it really just gave somewhere for people that were travelling, leaving the city, to go and pray before they went on their journey.
At this point, Mags and I took a little detour up to Horizon 22 to get a better view of the city. And this is free. It's best to book online if you can, but if you can't, then there are walk-in places available, and we struck lucky on that. Just don't try it at half term. So from this lofty perch, we can see very clearly a kind of bird's eye view of the City of London. And you can see Finsbury Circus down there and all these winding streets everywhere. Now, when we had the Great Fire of London, they did talk about rebuilding the city along the lines of Paris, you know, maybe even a grid system or something like that. And Sir Christopher Wren was one of the many people who put in a plan to rebuild it. And he actually got quite a lot of work rebuilding churches. In fact, he got a huge amount of work out of it. But they rejected the plans mainly because nobody could work out who owned what, because a lot of the deeds were burned in the Fire of London, and people had to prove that they owned those properties, and then they had to prove where the boundaries were. And they appointed a lot of fire judges to actually oversee this, and it was done at the Guildhall. So they just fast-tracked a lot of the claims through so they could get moving and get on with the rebuilding. So that's why it's rebuilt along the lines it is, because nobody could agree to have their property purchased and redo it. So to my mind, it's made the character of the place. It's just beautiful because it is all these lovely twists and turns, and once you find your way around it, it's really a lovely area to walk around. And I would recommend to you that if you've got time and you're coming to London, then have a look at the city, and maybe even come here on a Sunday when the business isn't being done and the place is a lot quieter, and you can just walk around in tranquility, have a place to yourself and see all the lovely old buildings, because these are obviously the streets of Pepys and Dickens, and some of the old buildings survive, not many, because of the way that the land was so valuable and things were demolished, which is a great shame, but there you go, that's progress, isn't it? And of course then we had the war, the Blitz, so that destroyed a good many more buildings. So this is what we're left with, but it's rather nice, isn't it? So this is not anything to do with the London Wall, but it's actually the remains of Grey Friars monastery, or the church that was in the monastery, and it was the largest church in London, a massive place, and many kings and queens were buried here. And after the dissolution of a monastery by Henry VIII, it was turned into a hospital for children. Now, the medieval church was actually destroyed in the Great Fire of London, and then it was rebuilt by Wren, and then it was destroyed by the Luftwaffe. So what's baffling is the bits you see left here seem to have been built with recycled material. So whether that was Wren's guys, or whether that was just people putting the rubble back together, and bits of the Roman wall are clearly in here.
So this is Moorgate, and Moorgate, there was a gate here, but it also kind of defined an area. And there was Moorgate within, and the other bit was called Moorgate without. And it really didn't lead anywhere. It was not one of the original Roman gates. It was just a little gate that they cut in the wall a pedestrian gate, and all it did is led out to a marshland called Moorfields, but it didn't have any real purpose. People used to go out there, dump rubbish, and then as it got covered over, Moorfields got covered over with basically people dumping rubble out there and things, it started to become an area where people went to walk, shoot, practice archery, do all kinds of things. Just basically get outside the city gates and have a walk in what was really just countryside, I suppose, then.
And at that point, they decided that there were so many people going through that they would enlarge the gate from a pedestrian gate to a proper road gate so you could get a carriage through it.
The more interesting thing in Moorfields now is the world famous Moorfields Eye Hospital, which has done a lot of pioneering work. It's quite fascinating because when you come out of Old Street tube station, you can follow a green line that they've put on the pavement, and there are larger signs there. It'd be nice to think there were ones in Braille as well. The idea being that people that arrive at Old Street tube station can then follow the green line right into the hospital. And if you ever walk past that hospital, a lot of people won't have noticed this. There's a clock outside, and the clock is in the shape of an eye. Quite a witty piece, really. So this is it, the site of Newgate, where Newgate prison was, and it was notorious. Could be banged up here for all kinds of crimes, from murder to stealing a loaf of bread, and there were a lot of debtors in there. If you fell into financial difficulty, they slung you in prison until you could pay your debts.
And this inscription above the entrance to the Central London Criminal Court says, "Defend the children of the poor, punish the wrongdoer." And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? All that time ago, child abuse was such an issue that they put it up on the wall and declared to all the world that that's what they were going to do. And you just think about that with all the child grooming gangs and Prince Andrew and everything else, and you think, have we lost sight of that?
There were within the prison different levels. If you were well off, you could buy yourself better accommodation. But if you were poor, if you had no means at all, then you ended up in the hellhole. And they hanged people here. They did it every Monday morning outside the prison gates. They had a public hanging. And previously they would have taken them from the prison to either Tyburn or down to Hangman's Wharf in Wapping. But then they decided that they would cut down on travel expenses. They thought, do you know what? What we do here is we hang them outside the prison. And they carried on doing that till very late on. And after that, they hanged them inside the prison. There was a fella called Jack Shepherd who was actually a plumber. And when he was in the last year of his apprenticeship, he sort of fell into bad ways, or good ways, depending on your opinion. And he started hanging out in Drury Lane, drinking, gambling, consorting with prostitutes. And because that's quite an expensive lifestyle, more than an apprentice plumber can afford, he kind of gave up the plumbing and started in what you might call petty crime, burglaries and all the other things, and then pickpocketing. And he ended up in Newgate prison. He was one of the very, very few people who managed to escape. And they caught him and they took him back to prison. And then he escaped again. And when they eventually caught this Jack in the Box, who'd sprung himself twice, they decided to make an example of him by hanging him. So he didn't escape that one. So this is the Central London Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. And you can see the scales of justice, that statue right at the top there. Whether it always ends in justice, who knows? There must have been a fair number of miscarriages of justice there over the years. Anyway, this is where the really serious crimes are tried. The murders, still a public spectator sport in as much as you can go in and watch the trial. So that's it, that bit of wall down there is the last remaining part of Newgate prison. This would have been it, the Kentish stone, the ragstone. It's almost criminal, isn't it? All this stuff dug up by the Romans. So here we've got Bow Church with the Bow bells. St Mary le Bow. Place, the Bow Cafe, I'm going to go in there. Anyway, if you're born within the sound of Bow bells, that makes you a Cockney, officially a Cockney, so that's definitely the case with me. I claim my prize. This section of the wall is inside Salter's Gardens, where the ancient company of meat and fish salters used to get together. This was their headquarters, and they're still operating and looking after this little patch. Now, these red brick crenellations were added in medieval times when London feared attack during the War of the Roses, and of course it was attacked. Now here we come to the Barbican, which was probably the biggest sort of military area in the whole of Roman London. And there's a real hodgepodge here of old wall and new wall and bits built on top of the Roman wall, and it's really quite difficult to work out what's what. And of course there's a few gravestones down there which have also been built into the wall when they cleared the graveyard to build this housing estate. Now this bit of tower looks impressive, doesn't it? But it's not actually a Roman tower, it's medieval. So it was built on top of the Roman ruins. Now at this point the audio has failed on me. I was saying that this section in Noble Street was only really discovered when a German bomb blew a blooming great hole in the ground and revealed the Roman foundations to what was an old military fort. Again, there are old bits of wall and there are new bits built on the top. In fact, there's not a lot that you can see down there of the old Roman stuff. So this was the gate that was located at the end of Fleet Street in Temple Bar, what they call Temple Bar, which was really a bar, an entrance to the City of London. Not the original entrance in the Roman wall, which is up at the other end of Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill, but this one at the other end of Fleet Street marked the entrance to the City of London. And this gate stood there for quite a long time, but it was in the way. They couldn't get double-decker buses through it, they couldn't get the traffic through very easily, and it caused congestion around the Aldwych. So they decided to move it, and somebody obviously put in a bid for it, and it was moved to a country house in Hertfordshire, where it stood for many years, rebuilt there, and then they decided for some reason that it needed to come back to the City of London. So it was brought back, but obviously they weren't going to go and reconstruct it back in the place where it originally was, where it was in the way. So they thought, where can we put it where it's out of the way, not causing any harm? And they decided on this entrance to Paternoster Square, which is just behind St Paul's Cathedral. So if you're visiting St Paul's, you can just come and have a look at this lovely old gate. You can see the oak gates. I don't expect they're original, but they do close. It's funny, when you start looking at what has been moved in London from one site to another, you come up with an interesting list. Look at this, isn't this great? Look, table tennis. I'm starting to see a lot of sculpture in London. Some of it quite bizarre, some of it a little bit surreal. This is wildlife, celebrating wildlife. Go wildlife, go. And this sculpture has got a little bit more historical relevance because it shows a man driving his sheep or goats, whatever they are, to market. I think they're goats. And he's taking those to market now. This is how the meat arrived in London, up here in Smithfield, which is not very far away. This is where they killed the animals. They weren't fridges, so obviously everything had to come in fresh and be slaughtered, and then people would buy it having seen it alive. And this guy was just one of many drovers who came into London. And this was sheep, this was cows, this was everything. So you had cowboys coming up from the country, driving their cattle over into London. And some of those cowboys, lived out in the country. The first time they came to London, they were probably wide-eyed, thought, my goodness, and then they saw what people were earning rebuilding London after the Great Fire. A massive boom in the building industry, and I thought, why am I driving cattle when I could be a builder? Cowboy builders, people that were a cowboy one day and a builder the next. Now I'm at Ludgate Circus, which is the last of the gates that I really want to tell you about. And this is Ludgate Hill that leads up to St Paul's Cathedral, so that's a high spot. And here was the gate named after King Lud. But the idea of Ludgate was that connected you with the Roman city of Bath. So you can see the way that it worked as you went round from the first gate, which took you out to Colchester.
So as you worked your way around, and then you had one that went up to York, and then one to the Roman city of St Albans, then Chester, and finally to Bath, and those lovely hot springs to ease your aching Italian bones.
Made our way down to Blackfriars, which is really where the wall ended, and from here on along the river they had palisades, which were basically tree trunks with sharp ends on them to stop anybody climbing over. But of course they had to have wharfs, they had to bring goods in and out by boat. So along here there would have been areas where they would have been guarded. They would have had Roman centurions on duty there guarding the wharf, making sure that nobody came in that way or sneaked out that way with goods. So basically all the way along here back to where we started at the Tower of London was a palisade, a continuous fence of stout tree trunks driven into the earth. And the reason they know that is because as the tide goes out, they've discovered the remains of these tree trunks all the way along, buried in the mud and perfectly preserved.
Now Magnus, he's getting a bit hungry now. His blood sugars have dropped through the floor. He's run out of puff, and we need to seek out some food urgently. So maybe something Roman, maybe a pizza. What do you fancy, Mags? Or pizza?
Both an ice cream and a pint.